Welcome to the deep dive. Every single day, we all make just countless decisions about food. Maybe it's that quick coffee on the way to work
Yeah.
or the ready meal you grab when you're exhausted. These choices, they seem simple, right? But they often hide this surprising complexity. And lately, there's been this huge buzz around plant-based diets. You hear it everywhere. It's often talked about as this ultimate solution for our health, for the climate crisis, for pretty much everything. But is it really that straightforward? Are all those plant-based options truly the same? And well, what happens when a really good intention meets the realities of industrial food production? Today, we're really plunging headfirst into, I think, one of the most crucial deep dives we've done. We're looking at our global food systems, and specifically the dramatic, maybe often unnoticed spread of ultra-processed convenience foods. We'll be paying particular attention to those products marketed under that, very alluring plant-based banner. Our mission here is simple.
Cut through the noise, yeah.
Extract the really crucial insights. How do these foods really impact the health of people, the vitality of places, and, the well-being of our planet? We want to challenge some common assumptions, peel back those layers of, let's be honest, sometimes misleading labels, and reveal some surprising connections that, you really need to know about. Now, to help us navigate this incredibly complex landscape, we've pulled together a really rich stack of sources. We're drawing on cutting-edge scientific research, the kind you find indexed on PubMed Central. That gives us deep insights into ultra-processing itself. We'll also look at detailed reports from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, the FAO. They've done loads of work on livestock's role and its footprint. Plus, we've got general overviews, say, from Wikipedia on the whole plant-based movement and some sharp, really up-to-date market analysis from the Good Food Institute. That helps us see what's actually happening in stores. Our goal, as always, is to give you, our listener, a genuine shortcut, a way to be truly well-informed without wading through everything yourself. We're not just listing facts. We want to give you those surprising revelations, help you connect the dots so it really sinks in. We want to empower you to understand what's truly important in this really crucial conversation. This deep dive, it's custom tailored for you, anyone who wants to look beyond the surface of their plate and grasp the bigger picture. So let's get started.
It's definitely a timely discussion. There's a huge perception gap, I think, between what many people believe about these plant-based options and, the underlying science or their broader impact. Yes. Unpacking the great plant transition. Hopes versus reality.
Okay, so let's start with this big idea, the Great Plant Transition. It's gained so much momentum globally, and it sounds so simple, so inherently good, doesn't it? A radical shift towards plant-derived foods. It's often framed as the solution, the elegant fix for our health and the planet. There's this powerful sense of urgency behind it.
Oh, absolutely. And the motivations driving it are, overwhelmingly positive. They come from a good place. It's about tackling some of humanity's biggest challenges. Public health bodies worldwide are championing it. You've got the Swedish Food Agency, for example, emphasizing more plant-based eating in their guidelines. And even more profoundly, researchers from The Lancet propose this idea of a planetary health diet. That's not just about us. It's a blueprint for feeding the world while hitting climate targets, tackling chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease, and improving animal welfare. These are huge, critical goals. And the belief is strong that changing our diet is maybe the most powerful lever we have. And it's not just talk, right? We saw countries like Denmark and South Korea announce actual plant-based action plans last year. So the ideal is definitely being embraced.
It does sound like a fantastic vision, a really vital concept, shifting towards more plants. But I keep wondering, with this huge commercial push to meet demand, where does that ideal meet the reality of how food is made today? The heavy processing, does that dilute the promise?
That is exactly where it gets much, much more complex. And it's the core argument from what some call the beyond plants perspective. Look, the basic idea, the science behind shifting toward more plants, is vital, necessary even. But what's happened commercially is that big food companies have jumped on this great plant transition with, enormous energy, driven by profit, by consumer demand, and this massive commercial effort. It's basically created a whole new category: novel, ultra-processed plant-based products. And here's the crucial distinction we have to make. These products, even with plant-based, splashed all over the label. They're often worlds apart from whole plant foods. Lentils, chickpeas, actual vegetables, fruits. These new products are often engineered to mimic meat or dairy. But in doing that, they can end up stripped of the nutrients, the fiber, that make whole plants so good for us. And worse, they often get loaded up with added sugar, industrial fats, sodium, and this long list of synthetic additives, emulsifiers, stabilizers, artificial flavors, colors. Stuff you wouldn't find in nature. There's this assumption, isn't there? plant-based must mean healthy. Lower calories, maybe. But the evidence that's building up suggests many of these highly processed versions can actually compromise health at all scales, individual, community, even environmental. What's really striking is how skillfully multinational corporations have used that appealing term, plant-based. They use it to justify and market this huge range of ultra-processed stuff, and they effectively conflate these factory-made items with genuinely healthy, whole food diets. It creates this health halo, especially around plant-based meat alternatives. You, the consumer, might see it and think, this is better than a beef burger for my body, for the planet. But then you look closer at the nutrition facts, the ingredients list, the processing involved, and it tells a very, very different story, much more complicated. It's really a prime example how marketing can obscure the reality of what you're actually eating.
Oh.
2, the health imperatives. What ultra-processed foods are doing to us.
That's such a critical distinction. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
Oh, wow.
How many times have we grabbed something labeled plant-based, thinking, yep, healthier choice, without really considering what's in it? And what's truly striking when we look beyond just the plant-based label, the impact of ultra-processed foods in general, whether they have meat or not, their impact on our individual health is it's profound. It feels like a public health crisis unfolding, and the connections are often surprising.
Precisely. The rising share of these ultra-processed foods, UPFs, in our diets isn't just a minor concern. It's rapidly becoming a major global public health crisis. It really demands urgent attention. Study after study has linked higher intake of UPFs to a significantly higher risk of multiple diseases and disorders, and not just the common stuff. We're talking a broad spectrum: infectious diseases, non-communicable diseases like heart disease and diabetes, and maybe most critically, a higher risk of excess mortality, just dying earlier. To give you specifics from the research, consistent UPF intake is associated with increased cardiovascular disease mortality, alarming link actually to certain central nervous system tumors, and, perhaps more widely known, a clear connection to rising rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension. It's systemic. It's compromising our physical well-being. What's particularly worrying and kind of paradoxical is their nutrient profile. UPFs often have, frankly, a much worse nutritional content compared to whole or minimally processed foods. They lack essential vitamins, minerals, crucial fiber.
But they're loaded with the bad stuff: unhealthy fats, way too much sugar, refined starches. Yet despite this poor quality, they are the most available, most aggressively marketed packaged products out there. They're everywhere, so people eat them widely. And this leads to this sort of hidden nutritional deficit. You might be getting enough calories, but not enough actual nutrition. Not the building blocks your body needs, even in places where food seems plentiful. It's a crisis of quality over quantity.
And it's not just our physical bodies, right? We tend to focus on weight, heart health when we talk diet. But you mentioned earlier there's this deep, often overlooked link between these foods and our mental well-being, our minds, our moods, even our behavior. What are UPFs doing there?
That's an incredibly important point. The link between UPFs and neuropsychiatric or mental health outcomes is critical and gaining much more attention. It's definitely not just physical. Research clearly shows associations between higher UPF intake and things like psychological distress, serious sleep disturbances, and we know how vital sleep is for mental health, and also a range of mental disorders, including depression and anxiety. These links are consistent across multiple studies, different populations, and beyond those, there are even more, maybe unsettling findings. For instance, higher UPF consumption has been directly connected to aggressive behavior in adolescents. Now, that's not just a simple correlation. It points towards potentially profound systemic effects these foods might have on developing brains, impacting things like impulse control, emotional regulation. A key mechanism thought to be involved here is something called dysbiotic drift. Think about your gut microbiota, the huge community of microbes in your digestive system. Dysbiotic drift is basically when that balance gets thrown off, shifting towards a less healthy mix of bacteria. And here's the kicker. Your gut and your brain are constantly talking. It's called the microbiota gut-brain axis, a communication superhighway. So when UPFs disrupt your gut environment, it sends negative signals up that axis. And that can directly affect brain function, mood, behavior. It's fascinating and a bit scary. Now, if you connect that to the bigger picture, the societal burden of mental disorders is just immense. In suffering, yes, but also economically. Mental disorders are the most costly conditions in the U.S., something like $201 billion a year. When you see numbers like that, understanding these deep dietary links becomes incredibly important, not just for individuals, but for public health systems everywhere. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, addressing diet could be a really powerful tool in a much broader mental health strategy.
Okay, so if it's not just the obvious things like sugar and fat, but these more subtle shifts, what specific ingredients in these UPFs are raising the biggest red flags? Because it sounds like it's often the hidden stuff, the things we barely glance at on the label, that might be having these profound effects.
You're absolutely right. It's often not the main ingredients, but the additives, the things put in for texture, shelf life, or appearance. Things often deemed safe in isolation, but consumed regularly. That's where concerns arise. Let's take dietary emulsifiers. These are everywhere. In ice cream, processed cheese, salad dressings, even some plant-based milks. They keep things smooth, stop separation. Now, human studies show common ones, like carboxymethylcellulose, can significantly impact our gut microbiota, that balance of bacteria, and also our metabolome, the collection of small molecules involved in metabolism. Basically, they can disrupt your gut, potentially leading to inflammation, and alter how your body processes nutrients. And the effects seem to go beyond the gut. In animal studies, mice specifically, these emulsifiers have been shown to alter anxiety-like behaviors, social behaviors. Interestingly, sometimes in a sex-dependent way, males and females react differently. They can also increase sensitivity to social stress, meaning exposure might make an individual more vulnerable to the negative effects of stress. And they've even been seen to alter gene expression in key brain areas. The amygdala, think emotion processing, fear, anxiety, the hypothalamus stress response, hormone regulation. There's even some early work suggesting that exposure in the womb could alter the offspring's behavior later on. That points to potential long-term developmental impacts. It's subtle, but potentially pervasive. Then you have monosodium glutamate, MSG. People often think of it with certain cuisines, but really, it's a super common flavor enhancer in chips, instant noodles, soups, frozen meals, lots of processed stuff. Studies have suggested links between MSG and ADHD-like behavior, at least in animal models or maybe susceptible individuals. Also, anxiety-like behavior in animal studies, a direct neurological impact. And crucially, like emulsifiers, MSG can cause significant changes in gut microbiota composition, again, disrupting that crucial balance. Given that strong gut-brain connection we talked about, these changes caused by MSG could have ripple effects on mental well-being and neurological function. It really highlights how these seemingly minor industrial additives, put in for taste or texture, can potentially have these profound cumulative effects on our bodies and our minds. It underscores the hidden complexity of UPFs. 3. The environmental cost. Beyond the plate,
Right, we've covered a lot on the impact on our bodies, our minds, profound stuff. But this deep dive is also about people, places, and planet. So how do these food choices, especially in this era of ultra-processed convenience, connect to the bigger picture, Earth's well-being? Let's bring in this concept of planetary health. What does that mean in this context?
planetary health is absolutely fundamental here. It's a really vital framework. It's an emerging field that essentially defines health not just as human well-being, but as the inseparable connection between human civilization's health and the Earth's natural systems. It recognizes that our health, individual, community, public health, is intrinsically linked to the health of everything from microbes within us to global ecosystems. What's powerful is how it transcends those old artificial divisions. Biological, psychological, social, cultural health. They're all connected. Its goal is to tackle what sometimes called Anthropocene syndrome, basically that cluster of interconnected global crises defining our time. Think climate change, biodiversity loss, environmental degradation, resource depletion, social inequities. It sees these not as separate problems, but as a deeply interconnected web, and it says we can't truly fix human health issues without also healing the planet. They're two sides of the same coin.
That brings us straight back to food then, because it's not just our personal health at stake. The environmental footprint of these ultra-processed foods, even the ones labeled plant-based, is something we often gloss over, right? We tend to assume plant-based automatically means eco-friendly, but it sounds like that's a dangerous oversimplification.
Exactly. That's a huge oversimplification. While many UPS might start with plant ingredients, no animal products, their production and distribution demand serious environmental scrutiny. The truth is, these foods often carry significant, often hidden environmental baggage throughout their entire life cycle. Think about sourcing ingredients. Large-scale industrial farming of monocrops, like corn for corn syrup or soy for protein isolates. That often means vast land use, heavy reliance on chemical fertilizers, pesticides, contributing to soil issues, water pollution. Then the manufacturing itself. All that refining of oils, isolating proteins, washing, processing, it's incredibly energy intensive, uses huge amounts of water. And it doesn't stop there. Think about transportation. Ingredients might come from one continent, get processed on another, packaged somewhere else, and then shipped globally. That's a massive logistical network, heavily reliant on fossil fuels, pumping out greenhouse gases, and finally packaging. UPFs almost always come in layers of complex packaging plastics, foils, coated cartons. Energy intensive to make, often hard or impossible to recycle, leads to mountains of waste. So just because it started from a plant doesn't mean it has a light footprint when you factor in all that industrial processing, global travel, and packaging. It's a world away from eating a locally grown apple, isn't it?
It really is. That's a crucial point that definitely reframes the narrative. But look, to be balanced, we also have to acknowledge that traditional animal agriculture has its own significant environmental impacts. We hear a lot about that. But it's also complex, isn't it? It's not necessarily as simple as just saying eliminate all livestock.
No, it's absolutely not that simple. A nuanced view is essential here, moving beyond just meat versus plant. The FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, provides really detailed data. Yes, greenhouse gas emissions from livestock are substantial. Let's break it down a bit. Land use change clearing forest for pasture or feed crops. That's about 0.7 gigatons of CO2 equivalent a year, around 9% of the sector's total emissions, often linked to deforestation, say, in South America. Then feed production itself, that's a huge chunk, 2.6 gigatons CO2 equivalent, about 33%. That includes emissions from making fertilizers and pesticides for feed crops and the potent nitrous oxide release when those fertilizers are used. Livestock production directly, that's the biggest slice, 3.7 gigatons, 46%, mainly methane from cows and sheep, digesting food enteric fermentation, plus on-farm energy use. And manure management adds another zero point 0.8 gigatons. And yeah, the land use is vast. About 35% of all habitable land globally is used for livestock. So the footprint is undeniably significant. However, and this is a big however, we have to connect this to the bigger picture, livestock provides absolutely essential services beyond just food, especially in developing regions. For millions, livestock are like living savings accounts, a form of credit. They buffer families against shocks, climate disasters, illness. In mixed farms, they eat crop residues, things we can't eat, turning them into valuable protein. Their manure is vital fertilizer, reducing reliance on chemicals. And think about drought power, cattle, horses, donkeys. They provide transport, plow fields. In Northern Africa, it's up to 81% of that power. Indispensable. So these roles go way beyond just food. They support education, health, community stability in countless ways. What's really interesting, though, are the opportunities for efficiency and mitigation within the livestock sector. Studies show a clear inverse relationship between productivity and emissions intensity. Like low milk production per cow equals high emissions per liter of milk. But high production per cow means much lower emissions per liter. This suggests that even small increases in productivity in less intensive systems could significantly reduce the overall emissions intensity, producing more with less impact. And there are loads of adaptation strategies being explored. Things like supplemental feeding when natural forage is scarce, which is becoming more common with climate change. Agroforestry, integrating trees with livestock and crops. That sequesters carbon, improves feed quality, which can lower methane, provide shade, buffers against hazards. It's a win-win-win. Plus, things like better early warning systems for weather events, weather index insurance to help farmers manage risk. So it really frames it as a much more complex discussion than just meat bad, plants good. We need to consider the nuances of processed plant foods and the multifaceted role and potential improvements in animal agriculture. It's about finding holistic, sustainable solutions. 4. Navigating the market and consumer landscape.
That adds such a crucial layer of nuance. It completely shifts how we might perceive these broad categories. Okay, let's pivot now to the commercial side. We heard so much about the plant-based boom for a while. It seemed unstoppable. But what's the reality on the ground now in the supermarkets? Is that explosive growth continuing, or are there maybe some challenges consumers aren't really seeing?
That's a great question. And yeah, the market signals have definitely been more challenging lately for the plant-based sector. After that really rapid growth spurt in the U.S. market, say from 2019 to 2021, things really started to moderate in 2022. And then we actually saw declines in sales in 2023 and 2024. Now, this slowdown, maybe not surprisingly, happened right when prices for many plant-based products went up quite a bit. And that hit consumers just as inflation was high and budgets were getting tighter. Purchase patterns also showed weaker consumer engagement in many categories. What's really critical here, the key barriers that keep coming up are taste and price, still paramount for most consumers. According to a Mintel report from 2023, something striking. Over a quarter of all U.S. consumers are now considered lapsed plant-based meat buyers, meaning they bought it before but haven't in the last 3 months. That signals a definite drop-off. It really underscores this urgent need for brands to innovate, to improve the actual eating experience. When consumers were asked, more than a third said lower prices would make them consider plant-based meat more seriously, and maybe even more telling. Over a quarter said they'd buy it if the taste and texture were exactly like conventional meat. It tells you a lot about what drives purchase, right? The satisfying that craving, value for money. Let's look at the specific numbers for 2024 data, just to paint the picture. Total plant-based food dollar sales, down 4%. Unit sales, down 5%. Plant-based milk, that's the most established category, right? Sales down 5% to $2.8 billion. Still huge, but slipping a bit. Holds about 14% of the total milk market. Plant-based meat and seafood, sales down 7% to $1.2 billion. That's the third straight year of decline. Its market share also slipped slightly, down to 0.8% of total meat sales. And maybe the most telling sign of trouble, household penetration. How many homes are buying it? For plant-based meat seafood, it dropped from 20% in 2021 to just 13% in 2024. That strongly suggests households are actually leaving the category, not just buying less. That's a real challenge for the industry. But it's not all doom and gloom, and this is where it gets interesting, seeing what is working. There are definitely bright spots. Plant-based protein liquids and powders. Double-digit growth. Baked goods and desserts. Same thing, double-digit growth in dollars and units. Suggests specific needs are being met there. Also, traditional plant-based staples, tofu, tempeh, seitan, they saw strong growth too, maybe indicating a preference for less processed, more established options. Plant-based eggs, a smaller category, saw modest dollar growth. So while the overall market is facing headwinds, certain segments are thriving. Either they're meeting specific consumer demands, or maybe they're closer to those whole food roots. It suggests a more discerning consumer base, perhaps.
So, okay, given all that, the slowdown, the lapsed buyers, but also the bright spots, what does this actually mean for you, the listener, trying to make choices? Are people still fundamentally interested in plant-based, or was it just a trend that's hitting a natural plateau? Because those numbers could make it seem like interest is really dropping off.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a nuanced picture. Despite these recent sales challenges, consumer interest and openness still remarkably high. This is where aspiration really comes into play. Roughly 75% of U.S. consumers aged 18 to 59 say they are still open to eating plant-based meat or dairy in the future. That tells you the underlying desire for healthier, maybe more sustainable choices is definitely still there, even if current products or prices aren't always hitting the mark. And look at this, about a third, 33% of U.S. adults who eat meat say they are actively trying to reduce their intake. That's a huge segment actively looking for alternatives for whatever reason, health, ethics, environment. What's also fascinating for retailers is that households buying both plant-based and conventional meat, the flexitarians, they're actually high-value shoppers. These households spend 24% more on total groceries than the average household. They're valuable customers. And there's huge potential to capture more of their spending. For example, in 2024, these dual buyers spent only about $50 on plant-based meat compared to over $600 on conventional meat. That's a massive gap, a huge opportunity for plant-based brands. If they can bridge that gap on taste, price, and value, convince those flexitarians to shift more of their spending. And we have to acknowledge the progress. Taste and texture improvements have been a major driver, especially in the past years. Some subcategories, like plant-based chicken nuggets apparently, are getting really close to tasting like the real thing in studies, nearing sensory parity. So while taste and price remain top barriers for many products, the innovation is happening. The sensory experience is improving. So yeah, headwinds exist, but the fundamental consumer interest seems very much alive. The potential for future growth is still enormous if the industry can crack those key challenges for the consumers actively looking for better options. Policy, industry influence, and paths forward.
This naturally leads us to a broader level, doesn't it? How do commercial interests, these huge food corporations, their marketing budgets, how do they actually shape the whole food landscape? And the choices you make every day, it feels like it's not always just about what we want to eat, but maybe what's pushed on us most effectively.
That's a really critical question about pervasive influence. There's a long, well-documented history here. Commercial entities influencing global food systems, sometimes driven by what you might call sheer commercial imperative, maybe even a kind of dispositional greed, like we saw depicted in films like The Founder about McDonald's expansion. This underlying drive shapes our food environment in ways we often don't even consciously notice. What's available, what messages we see. It manifests in obvious ways, like ad campaigns, but also more subtly. Think about public health messaging, sometimes co-opted by corporations. Burger King, for instance, had that Real Meals campaign, linking to mental health moods. Clever marketing, fundamentally selling burgers. Even McDonald's has done things like promoting vaccine awareness. It positions them as a responsible partner, doesn't it, despite the nature of their core product. What's really concerning, I think, is the documented presence of front groups, and undeniable conflicts of interest that have sometimes influenced official nutrition guidelines. This means the very advice you might get from governments or health bodies could be subtly shaped by industries with a vested interest in selling certain foods, including ultra-processed ones. It just highlights how vital critical thinking is for consumers. You have to evaluate marketing claims, dietary advice, even seemingly neutral health messages. You always have to ask, who benefits from this message? Is it truly aligned with public health and planetary well-being, or is it mainly about sales? This often unseen influence really can shape what's in stores, what's promoted everywhere, and ultimately what becomes just a normal part of our diet.
Okay, so if a system has these deep issues, health impacts, environmental costs, corporate influence, what can actually be done about it? What kinds of policy solutions are being tried around the world to maybe nudge us towards a healthier, more sustainable food future, one that prioritizes well-being?
This is exactly where thoughtful policy becomes so crucial. We need interventions to shift the whole system. And we've seen some really interesting and effective examples globally. Using economic tools, for instance. Mexico implemented a tax on non-essential energy-dense foods, basically, a junk food tax. And studies showed it led to real reductions in purchases of those items, especially among lower-income groups. It shows pricing can influence behavior. Chile's law of food labeling and advertising is another powerful example, really comprehensive. They introduced those stark black octagon warning labels on foods high in sugar, salt, fat, calories, very visible. They also restricted advertising of unhealthy foods to kids, no cartoons, no celebrities. And the results? Pretty significant. Manufacturers actually reformulated products to avoid the labels, and people bought less sugary drinks and other processed items. It really shows strong, clear policy can impact both industry and consumers. Beyond taxes and labels, there's also research into how to build public support for these kinds of policies, framing them effectively, using ideas like taste engineering or connecting policies to values people already hold, making the healthy choice feel like the easier, more desirable choice. If we connect all this back to the big picture, it just underscores the need for a much more nuanced, holistic approach to food systems. Solutions need to be mutualistic. They need co-benefits for people, communities, and the planet. Tackling complex issues like malnutrition, both over and undernutrition, within a sustainability framework, it will require cooperation with the food industry. That seems unavoidable. But, and this is key, that cooperation needs clear boundaries, robust, independent oversight, to make absolutely sure commercial interests don't end up undermining public health or environmental goals. It's about finding that balance, collaborating where possible, but always prioritizing long-term societal and planetary well-being.
Wow, what an incredibly eye-opening deep dive this has been. It just seems so clear now that the world of plant-based food, and really all our food choices, it's just far more complex than those simple labels suggest. It's really not just about plants versus meat, is it? It's fundamentally about how our food is produced, how it's processed, and the profound ripple effects those decisions have on our bodies, our minds, and yes, our planet. This journey has really shown that sometimes what looks like a simple, healthy choice, especially with convenience foods, can actually be highly processed, carrying hidden costs we just never considered.
And if we connect this to that bigger picture, you see this huge opportunity for positive change, actually starting right at the individual level. Given that powerful, undeniable link we're seeing between ultra-processed foods, our mental well-being, and environmental health, how might rethinking your daily convenience foods, even those ones that look like healthy plant-based options, how might that be one of the most powerful, most accessible levers you have? For your own flourishing and for the planet's, it really forces you to reconsider those everyday choices, doesn't it? And their silent but potentially profound consequences.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, we really encourage you, look beyond the marketing. Look past the flashy packaging. Take just a moment to consider the processing level of your food choices. Ask yourself not just, is it plant-based, but how much has this actually been altered? What's really in it? Keep going on your journey of being well-informed. Let this deep dive maybe spark even more curiosity, more critical thinking about what's truly on your plate. Thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exploration.